But yes, so once again, thank you for those. Thank you everyone for attending this session on the Ins and Outs webinar series hosted by the Student Forum. And particular thanks to both Abby and Frokistos for kindly setting aside some time to be with us today to talk through the application process for placements and OIVs. From the chat, it seems that most people are here for both, so that's quite a good spread. And just before we begin again, just a few house rules. When I hand over to either Abby or Frokistos to kick off the session, I think it would be great if you can to keep your microphone muted while they're speaking. Feel free to drop any questions into the chat box while they're speaking, but alternatively, you can use the raise hand function once they're finished, and we can open out into a more open discussion, roundtable discussion with us all. So yes, without further ado, who would like to take over from me, Abby or Frokistos?
I can possibly
Perfect.
take over, and just Abby will chip in as and if necessary. So first of all, let me say I haven't put together a formal presentation because I've given a formal presentation on OIVs and placements during the student induction, but if anybody wants, we're happy to share those slides. What I think is important for me to say is two things. What makes an application a successful one? So getting you to think about the factors you need to be building into your application in order to, you know, for us to consider it as a good application, and then what is the kind of value added that you need to get out of those two opportunities, and then of course, you know, a few admin elements. So generally there is no deadline for placements or OIV applications. We are happy to accept them as they come. And what is usually happening is once you've filled in the form, which you can find on the virtual learning environment on the VLE, Abby does an initial screening, and then it's usually evaluated by the training, employability, and development group. Obviously, in the past, we had to be a bit stricter in terms of the number of OIVs and the number of placements we were giving out, because obviously we don't have unlimited funds there. The last few years, we have been relaxing that, because obviously the number of applications we have been receiving due to COVID is relatively limited. So if an application comes our way, we're generally quite keen to work with the student if necessary, provide some feedback and work with them and basically build up the application so it can be a successful one. So it gets reviewed by the training, employability, and development group. I usually make a recommendation to the group, and then the group provides some feedback. Now, there are a number of ways you can think about them. Faye, I know she's with us. I saw her earlier. Faye is actually doing a placement, but she's doing a placement overseas. So that's one very interesting approach in terms of the placement. So the placement can be either in the UK as well as overseas. Obviously, we would need to think about the additional costs for the travel and the accommodation and everything like that. Equally, an overseas institutional visit, and I emphasize this every single time I get in front of students. What we've done is we've slightly changed the policy the last couple of years, and if you are thinking about an overseas institutional visit, we have now included in the options what we call a virtual overseas institutional visit. So if there are cases where you think that there is significant training available in a particular institution abroad, and you need to take advantage of that training, you can apply for a virtual overseas institutional visit without necessarily having to go through the travel element. Obviously, you're missing a part of the experience, because the experience is to travel abroad, meet people, network. All these are elements of an overseas institutional visit. But we're happy to accept applications for an overseas. Now, I said that so far, the last 2 years, we have been very open and we have been funding almost everything. But as we anticipate a return back to normality, whatever the new normal will look like in terms of travel, in terms of networking events, we will be receiving more and more of these applications. And therefore, we might have to be stricter occasionally when it comes to funding. As I said, there is a pot of money which is ring-fenced for placements and overseas institutional visits, but it's not unlimited. And it's not usually on a first come, first serve basis. It's usually a proper evaluation. So in the past, we had proper evaluation and almost like mini competition.
We'll obviously let you know when that funding is reaching a point where we might not be able to fund anymore. We'll be very transparent with you as to when we won't be able to accept anymore for that academic
year.
So that you can obviously be aware of that and plan. So that will be it. We agreed with the student forum that would be a very transparent two-way conversation.
And it's also worth highlighting that in terms of the placements, we had the UKRI placements advertised in the beginning of the academic year. We asked students to send us their application well in advance, so we can provide some feedback and we can strengthen those applications. B, we can get a sense of how many of those will go forward, so we can actually plan in terms of the budgets. Now, what makes it a successful one? So any questions so far in terms of the procedural admin elements? Either through the chat or you can come on mic. Chloe?
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to double check I have the right current OIV form. I noticed compared to an old version, it doesn't have a section from the host to support, from the overseas host, just from your supervisor. Is that correct? There's a section where you have to justify why you want to go and visit, a section from your supervisor, your home institution, but I didn't see a section for your host overseas. So that's a really specific question. I just thought it was a bit strange that it wasn't on the form, but I wasn't sure if it was because maybe I had an old, but like.
I don't recollect having changed the form recently.
Maybe I think at the end I could try and just, or maybe I'll send it to Abby.
Abby's probably looking into that as we speak.
It could just be me and I've somehow lost that section, but when I looked at the latest form I had, I couldn't see the host section. But I'll double check as well.
Okay. So I think what most of you want to hear from me is what makes a good application and what is, how does a good application look like. So in all cases, our overarching criterion is the value added to your PhD. So the value added to your PhD and the value added to your training as well, because both OIVs and placements are training opportunities. So a good OIV and a good placement should provide you with training which is necessary for you to develop career goals. Something that most people don't tend to do, and I would encourage you to do, is link the placement or the OIV with their TNA, the training needs analysis. So if it's a training need that you have clearly identified on your annual TNA and you refer back to that training need as part of your OIV or placement application, that automatically for us, flags it up as a crucial and important opportunity for you to meet your training targets. So that's something, it's a tip. And as I said, I don't frequently get to see it in applications. People, they talk about the wonderful opportunity, they talk about everything like that, but they never actually, almost what I would call, close the loop, saying, look, this is what I have actually told you in my training needs analysis. It doesn't have to be the latest one. It could be, a training needs analysis form that you've submitted in your first year, where you've identified that potentially over the course of your PhD, you might need to do X. and the placement or the OIV offers you that X as part of your training. So that is one thing. The other thing is, so looking backwards, the other thing in terms of a successful application is looking forward. And it's not only about what training need covers, but also how that application helps you develop your employability skills, helps you achieve your career goals. I can give you a very good example of an OIV. OIVs that tend to basically, go to universities where there is an established network and established collaboration with the existing supervision team, where the student will get opportunities to work with the team, the local team, potentially produce papers, become part of the research seminar series. All these things are things that add to your future career goals. So you need to also be looking forward. Actually, I'm looking at the TNAs the last couple of days, the ones that have been submitted since October. And year on year, one of the areas where you say you need further development is networking, impact, engagement, career development, career aspiration. So a good placement as well as a good OIV will prepare you for developing those skills and will help you develop those skills. And it's really crucial in the application to discuss how the visit or the placement will help you develop those skills. Now, in both cases, what is really important to put on the application is concrete examples. It's not enough to say, look, I'm going to be working on a few papers with that team over there. Now, this is not good enough. I think what you need to be saying is we have, or I have drafted a list of potential papers, a list of potential titles that I can collaborate with the experts in my overseas institutional visit. And you can give us sight of those, don't be over ambitious. Don't say we're going to be producing 10 papers together, but try to give us at least one or two of those ideas that you will be working with, if publishing is part of your plan. In some cases, publishing might not be part of your plan. I'm just suggesting this as an example. So look forward as well and tell us how the application will actually help you develop those crucial career skills that will potentially secure employment. Equally, in the placement, and I think that's also in Faye's case, the placement might provide you with additional training that is quite important and quite crucial for your PhD as well. So Faye's application is a very interesting one because it brings the academic side together with the placement opportunity, together with an overseas element, and this is why we've asked Faye to join us as well. So it brings all these aspects together, and this is why it makes it a strong application. So it talks about the training opportunities and the training development. It gives us a very clear time frame of when training will take place and how that training will help her throughout the placement, but also how that training generates transferable skills that she can then use for her PhD. And this is actually why, if you look at the regulations around placements and OIVs, ESRC does not allow us to award any placements or OIVs in either the first 3 months of your PhD or the last 3 months of your PhD. It's because we want you, it's not because we want you to focus on other things, it's because we feel that within those 2.5 years, you can basically take advantage of all these opportunities that a placement or an OIV is creating. So we're looking at linking with training, we're looking at linking with future career goals and future kind of skills that you need to develop. Occasionally, we would also look at the placement and the OIV being what we call realistic. it's a very common criterion we use in terms of the all the competitions. One of the criteria we have for the student competition is feasibility of the project. And because usually placements and OIVs are relatively condensed in terms of the time, what we're looking there is that the goals you're setting to achieve are realistic and feasible within the time frame. So as I said, don't try to impress the TED group and myself by over-promising, because we might turn around and say, actually, there is an issue here. We don't think the student will achieve all these things. And we might come back to you and say, look, you need to provide us with an additional timetable or a more detailed information on certain things before we can actually commit to funding. So think carefully about those activities that you will be discussing in your application, that you will be talking to us about, and how those activities will impact on your PhD. In terms of the placement also, there is an element around risk and assumptions, and this is a section that you also need to put a lot of attention to. We are risk averse, and we don't want to commit funding to cases where they might present themselves as significant risks to our students. So what we want there is, in that section, for you to give us the confidence that you have thought about all the potential elements, especially when it comes to overseas visits or placements which might have this particular element of risk. We want you to tell us that you've thought about all these different things and how you will be mitigating. Some of the things are very straightforward, and they're usually mitigated by the university insurance. Other things are less straightforward, and these are the areas where you need to provide us with some additional information in order to give us the confidence that you know what you're doing, and you can have a safe placement and a safe overseas institutional visit. I'll pause there, just summarizing that the three things I want you to remember is training needs analysis, links with that, career development and how it links to that, but also, you know, the element of feasibility and being a realistic project within the maximum, the 3 months that you will be spending on a placement or an overseas institutional visit. Abby, anything else?
I think it's important for you to consider which one you're applying for as well. And just to remind you that you can apply for both. Just because you've applied for one and possibly been awarded it doesn't mean that you can't then, so if you've applied for an OIV and then a placement comes up, that won't disadvantage you in terms of what TED's looking at. You know, we're here to support as many opportunities as we can. Everything is assessed on its individual merit, so you're not disadvantaged by applying for both of the opportunities. I think thinking about whether it is an overseas institutional visit or a placement is also really important. Are you going for a defined project somewhere that isn't at an institutional organization or research office, or is this something else that's of benefit for you? So I think that's really clear to make sure you're applying for the right thing and the right funding for the type of collaboration that you've assessed. I think that's something that comes to me before it comes to you. I think for Kiskos a bit sooner. That's one of the queries that I get is, do I apply for a placement or do I apply for an OIV? So thinking about what it is you're going to be doing and the type of organization helps shape actually what funding you apply for. Also noting that as well as the funding that comes through this, it can be supported by your RTSG. So when you're thinking about costing out an application form if there's certain elements of it that put you over what the funding budget is, to think about, is there a case for being able to use your RTSG to support that? And again, linking that back in with what Francisco said about your training needs, that's a good way of linking back into the TNA that you did, and justifying those costs as well. I think those would be some things that I direct people to when I'm having those initial conversations before it gets through to the TED group. Yeah.
Can I also say the following? I'm not going to be revealing any information, but I can share with you. I'm looking at OIV scores. So I've just opened up a TED members Excel, and we've asked TED members to evaluate, and one of the key questions we asked them is value for money. I've got here a visit who basically, it's at a very prestigious institution, but the way the candidate has presented it is, instead of doing one single visit in 3 short kind of intervals, it was asking for a relatively significant amount of money, very close to £4,000. And I can basically read out, because it doesn't reveal anything in terms of information, I can read out the comment that the TED member made. It's not me, so it's another member of TED. And the member says, effectively, the whole second year of PhD would be taken by completing a taught course, lots of travel to a very expensive location. The necessity of completing this course to meet specific goals of a PhD is not well justified. The maximum sum is exceeded. Okay, so I've given you the characteristics. The way it was presented was in 3 short intervals, without giving us any justification why that couldn't be done in a single way. It was taking very long to develop the skills. The TED member talks about a whole year trying to basically build into the OIV, and there wasn't a very clear value for money there for us. Equally, the same member had to evaluate 2 other applications at the same time, and the comments on the first application where it seems a very concrete proposal with narrow specific goals in PhD achieved via appropriate supervision. And then the other application, which was even better, outstanding applicant and topic, broader collaboration goals, but seem achievable. So, a relatively ambitious application, but with goals that were achievable. So these are the comments I get from TED members when we're reviewing, so in this case it was OIVs, and obviously I collate all these comments, and sometimes I have the opportunity to go back to the student and say, look, we need to fix this one, and this is the way you need to fix it. This is the way you need to potentially be presenting the information, and have you considered it? Have you thought about that? Equally, we have funded in the past cases where the OIVs were usually the OIVs tend to be a bit more expensive, and they were quite expensive, but you could have no argument about the quality of the institution, the quality of the team that was hosting the student, the value added to their future career. And it's like, for me, it's a blessing to be able to say that someone 3 years down the line in their career basically had this fantastic opportunity visiting a truly world-leading institution, working with an expert who's basically very well published, and they managed to build that network, and they can then build on that network for their future collaborations and their future publications.
I think I'd be interested to know what people, as part of the process, would like more direction on. Is there an area of it that you would need direction on? Is it, like, from a SeNSS perspective, I mean, we've spoken about how you complete an application form. I wonder if there is, and I think maybe this might fall into the next one when people are talking about their experiences, but, you know, is there an area of the application process that you would like more information on? Because I know that sometimes people are not too sure how to start with even finding the opportunities. OIVs are obviously much more student-led. We can't particularly support in those. Those are your own collaborations that we kind of direct you towards your supervisor to help you make those connections. Placements is something that we're more active with. We're always looking with our own partners to be able to be generating them. They can obviously be student-led as well, where you do go out to a company or you see them yourself and then apply. But and obviously we're supporting the UCRI and DWP and all sorts of other placements that come through at the policy level. So but outside of that, is there, you know, given what we've already said, is there an area here that you'd like to discuss in more detail in terms of process?
Hi, Abby. I have a question on OIV. So this is our first year of PhD. So shall we already start working on our OIV application now? Or, I mean, I'm planning to do something in the second year. So shall I start working on the application already?
So I think this is exactly possibly the wrong way to think about it in a way.
Oh.
It's, I think what is important is, first of all, to have an honest discussion with the supervisor. So when we give you your offer letter, back in May, when we gave you your offer letter, we followed up with supervisors that have been successful in the competition, supervisors that basically got a student to work with them, and we presented your supervisors with all these opportunities.
Okay.
So what you need to do is you need to have a discussion with your supervisor about the OIV or the placement, and very carefully craft that as part of the project, as part of the PhD project, and as part of your training, PhD training. And once you've done that, then the supervisor can give you some very clear guidance. You know, these are the things I expect you to do, and these are the things I don't expect you to do. And occasionally, one of the most difficult things is convincing the supervisor, because they know more about you, they know more about your project. So if you convince them, and if you have their full support, then it's probably easier to convince Ted in a way. So I think the starting point, Sabrina, needs to be a discussion with the supervisor about the opportunity that you have identified, or the training need you need to cover in order to put an OIV or a placement in place, because the supervisor will be able then to point you towards the most appropriate institution or the most appropriate visit, and they will say, look, I've got this collaborator in this particular university that they're doing partially squares analysis, and they're the world leading expert, or they're one of the world leading experts, and you're going to be doing that as part of your PhD. So why don't you go and work with for a month with them in order to build your skills around that particular technique? So I think in both cases, in placements and OIVs, your starting point needs to be the identification of a need, the discussion with the supervisor, and that will provide the best foundation for you to have a good application. They sound very exciting, OIVs. They sound very exciting placements, but if you don't have a need to do an OIV or to do a placement, you shouldn't be simply putting an application forward because you think, oh, it's an interesting opportunity. Okay, so think very carefully about your starting point. And as I said, the starting point needs to be a very clearly identified need for your PhD or for your future career. and on that basis, discuss that with your supervisor. They will provide you with very, very useful input into that, and put it as part of the 3-year plan that you have, because you might be constrained by when the opportunity becomes available. So in the case of placements, for example, you might be constrained by what the partner is able, when the partner is able to host you, or equally for the overseas visit. So you need to work around all these constraints, but equally you need to be doing it at the right time for your project as well. You know, the example I've just used about partial least squares and training, it's not worth doing it during your 3rd year if it's something that you will be using in your 2nd year. So the earlier you put that application in place, the more convincing it will be for us to say, actually, there is a very clear need here.
And this is why we made a move away from running it as a competition twice a year, so that we could give the funding more flexibly around when placement opportunities presented themselves, or to give you that flexibility to start these conversations earlier, later, as your student journey progressed and you had those conversations, because we found that some people either missed their opportunities because the fund, when we were awarding the funding, was not sitting when they could take advantage of those opportunities. So we would also, just from a operational view, is ask for at least a month's lead time from you putting in your application from when you would wish to start your placement or your need to travel, just so that we can, that operationally, although we want to be able to pivot and address these opportunities as and when they arrive, which sometimes we know they just come up and you just find them. For us operationally, we do need a little bit of lead time. So please keep that in mind when you're presenting us with these opportunities. If there's a short lead time on them, that may affect our decision across feasibility to be able to fund it, if we don't think that everything can be put in place in time to get you there safely and risk aversely. So try and keep that minimum of a month possibly in mind. I mean, we're not saying we wouldn't, but you know, if it's a straightforward thing, it can be turned around, but sometimes it's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. That's helpful to know. Yeah.
Siobhan is asking a question. Siobhan says, I'm currently in the field, so wasn't sure whether OIVs were permitted while undertaking field work or as an add-on at the end of the field work. I wouldn't necessarily see it problematic being at the end of the field work. It potentially also saves us the cost of travel. And equally, you know, a lot of the questions around accommodation and risks and things like that might have been addressed already by the element of the fieldwork. So if there is an institution where you're doing your field work and where you feel that by presenting your results, for example, from your field work, because they know much better the local context than everybody else, is going to be something useful for your PhD, yes, I think that's an application that we can quite.
Yeah, we actually have
easily look at.
precedent of this. We had someone that was finishing up their field work, and as they were finishing up, they said, I've had this opportunity presented to me. Can I have some funding through the OIV funding to be able to take up this opportunity? And we were able to do that. So so yeah, we have done it in the past. Faye?
Yeah, it was just to confirm, I think, what you said. So for example, for an OIV, from when you wanted to start it, to give at least a minimum of a month to put your application to hear back, and for all the kind of like admin and travel to get booked. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, that would be a minimum. Obviously, ideally, we'd have, you know, a 3-month lead time would be great, because then that just means, but obviously we appreciate that sometimes these things come quite quickly. And like Francisco said, if that's when your host can have you, or, you know, it works with the organization that you're going into, whether that's an OIV or in a placement, then we'll work with you as much as we can to make those possible. But you know, somewhere between that 3 to 1 month lead time is ideal operationally for us, and to keep that in mind to be able to fully support you.
Chloe is asking this technical question about who's the administrative lead at your, usually it's the admin person in the graduate school or the graduate college. That's the person that is the administrative lead in the institution. The next question is from Oliver. I'm interested in completing a government placements due to PhD and personal commitment, unable to meet the deadline in October this year. Are these placements only offered once a year? I think, Abby, the answer is no. They're usually offered in other frequent intervals.
As
They
one
might,
they come up, yeah.
they might not be all, they might not be the same organizations, but UKRI usually opens them every 3-4 months, depending on the needs they have in different organizations. The most interesting ones obviously are the ones with the post, but obviously there are other cases. I think I saw Claire earlier, Muchnich, who's done a placement at the Department of Work and Pensions, or no, I'm wrong.
It was at UK Parliament, so the
UK
House of
Parliament.
Commons on the Education Select Committee.
And when was the what was the timeline, Claire, for that application? When was that advertised?
So they were advertised. It was like an open call around July,
Yeah.
and you had to submit by September, and then they did the interviews within the first, like the last week of September, first week of November, and then they told you. But my placement didn't start until April. So it was quite far into the future, but
Yeah.
they could have had it, and that was through UKRI.
Yeah.
I know that there are other placements for Houses of Parliament through different organisations like the Wellcome Trust and the BPI also do it at BPS, sorry, and they have different calls. So I think throughout the year you can get onto one of those calls even if you've missed it through someone else, but because my funding was through UKRI, that was the one that I was eligible for. So.
Isabel is asking what an organization with a substantive research office would be. Example, so I can give you a couple of examples. European Central Bank, ECB has a substantial research office. OECD. I think, Abby, correct me if I'm wrong, we even had an application for Europol at some point. So they were doing research within Europol. So as long as there is, you can justify that there is substantive research activity taking place in that organization. It doesn't have to be a higher education institution abroad. And obviously we can provide you with advice, and that it's basically also then the distinction whether it's actually a placement or an OIV in that sense, because if it doesn't have a substantial research office, you can present it as a placement. So you can still apply for that organization, but it has to be presented in a slightly different way. How much support is given with the organization of travel, visa, accommodation for IVs? I think what I would say is probably not our role to do that. You can either get support, especially with a visa, from your home institution. From our perspective, we would check whether you have done all these due diligence, basically. But we wouldn't, I need to be very open and honest here, we wouldn't be offering any support with visa, at least at the SeNSS level. And your host institution might be able to offer you that.
Yeah, so your admin lead, so the way that the funding works is that the institution, you would go through your admin lead to get your funding. So we directly as SeNSS don't give you the money. So you would have to speak to your administrative lead about how you access those funds. We've got 10 institutions, so everyone will have their own mechanism. So we direct you to the admin leads to talk to them about how you access your funds. You would need to be using your own institutional travel insurance and booking systems, and normally travel companies will be able to support you with visa application. In my experience previously, the travel companies that your home institutions are using should be able to support you with those pieces. But because we follow the we ask you to follow the risk assessments for travel set by your home institution, it sits with you, your admin lead and your supervisor to do that in the first instance. Obviously, if you come up against challenges that you need to raise with SeNSS, that there is anything that we can potentially help with, if there is something around a risk assessment where things are getting stuck, escalate it up to us and we can see if there is an intervention for us. But ordinarily, as Francisco said, that sits with yourself and your home institution.
For talking about placements, my email is open, so something pinged, which was actually quite interesting. So these will be advertised on the website soon, and we'll be telling you. An email just came through from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and they're offering what they call PhD enrichment years, which is opportunities for placements for students spending time with the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And actually what the interesting thing here is that the Institute for Fiscal Studies offers additional funds to the ones that we would offer. So it's one of those opportunities where you can actually top up the placement element with additional funds from another organization. As I said, it's hot off the press, just came through, and we will be advertising these opportunities soon on the website.
Are there any other questions from anyone? Oh yes, we have one from Faye.
Yeah, sorry, it's not a question as such, more of a, if anybody here has already attended a placement or an OIV, it'd be great if they could share their experiences next week. And we're still looking for people, and it would be, yeah, I think a really useful session if we could hear from students that have already kind of, been and done it. So that would be great.
And obviously from our side, just to reiterate that although I said funds are limited, so potentially in the future we might have to return back to some form of competitive process. So far it's not a competitive process, but we might have to return to that competitive process. We're here to support you, and we're here to provide you with feedback on even drafts of your application. So if you think that you've got particular questions that you might want us to comment on, we would be more than happy to do that.
Sorry, just a quick question. It's not directly on placement. I was wondering if someone did an internship during their field work in the field, and if they are able to share their experience in the next session or today.
I think that might be one that's saved for the next talk, which I believe is experiences, isn't it? You're going to have you've got some people coming and talking about their experiences.
We're in the process of finding them, yes.
Unfortunately, COVID has meant that the amount of people being able to take up these opportunities has been significantly reduced over the last 18 months. So in the first couple of years that we were running the competition, and as a competition, I mean, we made the switch just before COVID actually to run it not as a competition. We've actually had a number of people that we awarded OIVs and placements complete, so they've become essentially our alumni now. So they've been through the process. So you might be people that have started the application but not actually managed to get there. We awarded, the last number that we awarded, I believe, was December 19, and then we had people due to travel in March 20 and April 20, and as we know, the world kind of came to a halt from March 20, April 20 on. So we're now starting to get those that were awarded in 2019 starting to be able to re-establish those connections with their hosts and are looking to going in the new year. So maybe we could rerun that session again, as and when people come back in 2022 from their early traveling, because I do think we've got a couple of people that are going in the beginning of the new year on placements and OIV. So what we do also is we ask for reports. So as people come back, we will start to publish the reports on the website. So this will be a good resource for people that are thinking about doing OIVs, to give you a bit of an insight about how those went and some lessons learned and the things that they did, whether that's inspiration or helpful for you completing your own OIVs or placements.
So any final concluding questions from anyone? Otherwise, then I think I think we should definitely say a huge thank you for joining us today, Abby and Franciscos, and for helping share some valuable insights into the process. As well as the final session of this particular webinar next week, there is also an ongoing fieldwork support group that you are more than welcome to join. You can simply send me an email and I will add you to the mailing list. I know probably many of you have already heard me talk about the support group, but I noticed there are a few new faces in this session. So yeah, if you would like to join, we talk about all aspects of fieldwork and the SeNSS PhD experience, which will obviously include placements and field OIVs as well. So yes, that's the last concluding comment from me. But yes, thank you, Abby and Franciscos as well.